One, launch.
Hello and welcome. I am Pranay Upadhyay and you are watching India Today Global. US President Donald Trump is scheduled to meet the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today. This meeting is coming at a very important and a crucial time because yesterday President Donald Trump had a long phone call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, and he also indicated earlier that United States is preparing to give Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. However, yesterday after the Putin-Trump phone call, President Donald Trump indicated that he did not find it a good idea. But the weapon profile of the US military hardware provided to Ukraine, how did it change this conflict? And after over 3 years of time, as far as this Ukraine-Russia conflict is concerned, where do we stand now? And what are the possibilities of, what could prop up, what could come up during President Putin and Trump's meeting in Hungary? To discuss all these issues, I am being joined by senior journalist Sandeep Unnithan. Sandeep, welcome to India Today Global.
Thank you, Pranay. Thanks for having me.
And let's start first. What actually made President Donald Trump change his mind to give Tomahawk missile? Because yesterday when he was asked about, a possible supply of these missiles to Ukraine, he said that I did not find it a good idea and we do not want to deplete our own stockpiles. What do you read out of it?
Well, Pranay, a good question. Firstly, we don't know what was discussed in that call between President Putin and Donald Trump, but you can only guess at what the contents of that conversation could be. And it is very likely that President Putin must have told, Donald Trump that if Tomahawks were transferred to Ukraine, another red line would be crossed. Now, the Tomahawk has a very interesting history, Pranay. The fact is that it was a ground-based missile launcher, a long-range cruise missile, which had nuclear-tipped warheads on it. And it was removed as part of the START negotiations in the 1980s. It was a very, very effective weapon because it kind of circumvented the existing treaties which only governed long-range ballistic missiles. So cruise missiles were seen as destabilizing simply because they could fly very low, fast and low below the radar and deliver nuclear weapons. And that's why they were regarded as destabilizing. They were removed from Europe in the 1980s. And the United States today has the Tomahawks only on ships and submarines. They removed the air-launched versions and the ground-based versions. But now, in the last few years, they have been reintroducing the Tomahawk in the ground-launched role. And it is those stocks that one believes that Trump wanted to give a few of them to Ukraine. They're talking about numbers between 30 and 40. Now, if you see former President Medvedev's comments, where he said that, look, if the Tomahawks were launched, the Russian Federation would see that as something like a nuclear strike on Russia. The fact is that because the Tomahawk has been known to carry nuclear weapons, it sparked off this kind of paranoia in the Russian Federation thing. And I think that is one of the primary red lines that the Russians have articulated to the Americans. And the other one, as you mentioned, Pranay, is the fact that what President Trump says is also true. The Americans they have a limited number of these new ground-based missiles. It's a system called the Typhoon. It is only been introduced very recently, primarily to target the Chinese threat. And these are basically 4 Tomahawk missiles in a 40-foot container. It's the size of a 40-foot shipping container. And these missiles can rapidly be positioned around Southeast Asia in the Indo-Pacific to counter, Chinese in that area. Now, Trump does not want to deplete that arsenal of the Typhoon launchers by sending them to Ukraine. Now, this is something that Americans have warned Trump of. The fact is that do not deplete the American arsenal, which is kept for any eventuality of fighting a war with China. So is also, concern number two. Concern number one, of course, is the Russian concern, which is if you deploy Tomahawk missiles in Ukraine, then it's a red line. We may have to strike back with something similar. And the second one, and possibly something that would be, more on the American mind, is the fact that, look, if we start giving all our Typhoon launchers to Ukraine, there's not going to be any for us left when we would need them.
But Sandeep, do you see it as a typical carrot and stick approach by President Donald Trump? Carrot for Ukraine and stick for Russia?
Well, Pranay, you have to see the 15th of August as the tipping point in Trump's stance with the Russian Federation. He entered office saying that, look, Putin is a friend and he knows him very well, and therefore he can solve the Russia-Ukraine conflict in a couple of days, right? Of course, that didn't happen. So the August 15th thing was a ploy by the President Trump to get President Putin to agree to a ceasefire in the Ukraine war, to end the war. But that failed. As we all know, the 15th August summit in Alaska was a disaster. So what we've been seeing post 15th August is a new two-pronged strategy. Now, one is that you accelerate the deliveries of weapons that can help Ukraine, offensive weapons, right? The administration in the last couple of years has been giving Ukraine weapons that are primarily defensive in nature, like surface-to-air missiles, the Abrams tanks, F-16 fighter aircraft, which Ukraine could use for its defense, but not long-range offensive systems, right? Like the Tomahawk. The Tomahawk falls in the category of a extremely capable, extremely potent, long-range, very long-range cruise missile. It has a range of something like 2,500 kilometers. It will allow Ukraine to target Moscow from within its territory and deliver, something like 300, 400 kgs of explosive, which Tomahawk missile carries. So they are now pushing a harder line on Russia. This two-pronged approach is one is to rush the delivery of very capable offensive weapons like the Tomahawk. And the second one is to increase economic pressure on Russia by directly targeting its oil infrastructure, either by attacks through the Ukrainians. As you know, since August, Ukrainians have stepped up their attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure. America is coming down heavily on the largest buyers of Russian oil, which is India and China. You've seen the kind of statements, the public tirades that Trump has gone on, saying that India is, indirectly funding the war in Ukraine. So this is a twin-pronged strategy of trying to tackle Russia through hard measures and through soft measures.
Absolutely right. I think, Sandeep, and in last 10 months, we have seen that, around half a dozen times, President Donald Trump had a contact with President Vladimir Putin. They had 5 calls and a one-on-one meeting of 15th of August, which you mentioned. And they are also likely to meet within a span of like about in 2 weeks' time. This is what President Donald Trump has indicated, and that to be in Hungary. That is a very interesting place if they have a Budapest summit. But Sandeep, take us through the weapon profile, the defense, the military hardware provided by the United States to Ukraine to build the defenses of Ukraine, and how did it change the battlefield, the dynamics of the battlefield of Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Well, Pranay, I can say this with a great deal of certainty that nothing that the United States has provided Ukraine until now has altered the battle. In fact, everything that has been supplied to Ukraine has been defeated very easily by the Russian Federation, whether it is the Abrams tanks. There was something like 60 tanks that were supplied. Literally, all of them have been shot to pieces. They were the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. Most of them have been destroyed as well. The F-16s, 1 or 2 were shot down. The rest is of dubious utility. There is the Patriots, of course, are there. Ukrainians need them to shoot down Russian cruise missiles and aircraft. They've been using that quite well. But the biggest learning from the Russia-Ukraine war, Pranay, has been the use of long-range drones, and the Ukrainians are very good at that. The Russian Federation is caught up, and today Russia and Ukraine are the 2 biggest drone superpowers, I would call it, because their learning of their mastery of drone warfare, starting with tactical first-person view drones, right up to the very long-range heavy drones, is unprecedented, right? So it is not so much the American arms that can help the Ukrainians, it is how the Ukrainians could help the Americans with their knowledge of the battlefield and how the battle has really changed. So these have all been, there have been, I would say, these so-called wonder weapons that have been advertised that, now we transfer the ACMS long-range missiles, that is going to alter the battle. Nothing happened. Nothing has altered the battle in a way that the drones have. So drones are literally the changing thing, and these are very low-cost, inexpensive tools. So
in fact, yes, you're absolutely right, Sandeep. They turned out to be most effective and most potent weapon as far as this conflict is concerned. And be it HIMARS or be it the Patriot missile batteries, they are very costly, piece of military hardware. But they did not turn out to be that effective in that battlefield. You are absolutely right on those with those remarks. But coming back to today's meeting, what President Zelensky should expect, if not Tomahawk missiles? What is there on his demand list or his wish list? Because he has been asking for more offensive weapons from the United States so far. Both Biden administration as well as the Trump administration has not given very long range offensive missiles or long range offensive weapons to Ukraine.
Right. Pranay, if President Zelensky doesn't get the Tomahawk missiles, he's going to be a very disappointed man because, to him, see, the Tomahawk represents much more than just a missile system. It is actually a commitment of the United States for Ukraine to strike deep inside the Russian Federation, right? The fact that you're striking at Russia with a very, very potent weapon system like the Tomahawk, that is huge messaging. So while it is political messaging, right? So while the actual weapon may cause, hit an oil refinery or a military base or, even the capital of Russia, the political fallout of this attack would be far more significant. I mean, can you imagine the headlines that, Ukraine strikes at Russia with US supplied Tomahawk missiles? And the Tomahawk has rarely been used by any other country other than the United States. Only two countries use it, the US and the UK. If Ukraine were to do that, it would become a third country. And the political fallout of that is going to be enormous. Now, you know the capabilities of the Tomahawk. We've been since Desert Storm 1991. It's a missile that entered service in the 1980s, early 80s. Very capable for its time. It's a subsonic missile, which means it flies about 0.8 Mach, just with the speed of sound. It carries a warhead of about 350 kgs of high explosives, and it has a range of something like between 1,500 and 2,500 kilometers, depending on the variant. And it's a smart missile, right? This is the missile that actually introduced us to this new age of warfighting that we saw during Desert Storm. Its capability of destroying all the Iraqi surface-to-air missile units, their command centers, and all that. And in fact, it was the use of the Tomahawk missiles in Desert Storm in 1991 that actually got Indian scientists to ponder over it and say that, look, we need something like the Tomahawk, which can destroy radar sites, which can destroy airfields and do all of that. And lo and behold, the BrahMos missile was flagged off in the late 90s, the Indo-Russian joint venture. And we used the BrahMos during Operation Sindoor exactly in a very small way. The Americans had used them.
The world witnessed its result during Operation Sindoor.
Yes, absolutely. It was devastating, and of course, the Tomahawk is subsonic. The BrahMos is supersonic. Yes, 3 times the speed of sound, and it cannot be intercepted. And you can watch helplessly as this missile literally tears through your airspace and shatters your bases and command posts and radar sites and all of that. So it's a very capable missile. The Tomahawk is what it lacks in brute speed and strength. It makes up in its ability to be smart and networked. It's a smart missile. It flies low. It flies slow, but it's part of a larger architecture of AWACS, fighter jets, ground control stations, satellites, So it's part of this network. It's receiving inputs from this network, and it's also feeding inputs into this network. So it's a two-way kind of thing, and the missile is able to navigate precisely to its target, and it can take multiple.
But Sandeep, as you said, this is the missile which has only been used by United States and United Kingdom so far. And
Yes.
this is a very, very costly missile, around $250 per missile, if I'm not wrong in the cost estimates. But does Ukraine or Ukrainian military has the capability to launch, or United States has to train Ukrainian military first how to use this weaponry, and or to send their people, their experts for the usage of this missile?
Well, there will be a certain amount of training involved in this because it is the Americans would not want to position their soldiers there to fire it, because that would be seen as an act of war by Russia. The fact that you have American servicemen on Ukrainians firing missiles. So what the Americans will do if they agree to supply the Tomahawk, and that's a big if as we speak. They would have to train Ukrainian servicemen to man these Typhoon ground launchers. And it's not very complicated. Ukraine is, has fired similar such missiles. It has experience of using these kind of missiles. It is, of course, a little more sophisticated than anything that they've ever seen. But there would be a certain element of amount of training required, and that would take a couple of weeks, if not months.
So, Sandeep, at the last of our interaction, I would want to ask you about where do you see this conflict moving ahead now? It's been over 3 years. We do not see a position or a situation where we can say that there is a possibility of a ceasefire or a permanent solution. There has been discussions between the US and Russia. Ahead of this, or do you see a breakthrough during or after the Budapest summit of President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin?
Right. Pranay, firstly, the situation on the ground, you're looking at Russia in possession of something like 20% of Ukrainian territory in the Donbass. It hasn't, given up any of that territory. And the problem is that it's whatever offensives that they have launched, they've not been able to capture a whole lot of territory. Their offensives have slowed down considerably. They've captured just about 500 odd square kilometers in the last couple of months. And their resistance on the ground is ferocious because of the use of drones by both sides, and particularly by the Ukrainians. And the Russians are believed to have been suffering casualties of the order of over 1,000 soldiers per day. Those are very high figures. And, in a few weeks from now, Pranay, that's middle of November, you're going to see winter setting into Ukraine.
Yes.
Middle of winter will be around mid of November. And December and Jan is completely frozen. And this time you're expecting a very harsh winter across the world. And because of that, there's going to be very little chance of any fighting. Whatever now will happen in the next couple of days, I think the Russians are trying to go and grab as much territory as they can before winter sets in and before all movement, literally grinds to a halt. That is one. The second is, of course, the Americans are trying to get the Russians to talk to, get them to back to the negotiating table, which they tried in the 15th of August. That failed. That summit went through. Putin went back to the military option. But even if you look at it that way, the military option is yielding Russia very few returns. They lose a lot of soldiers. Their economy is showing signs of, cracking. That pressure is, beginning to be felt in the economy as it enters the fourth year. So literally both sides are exhausted. And very clearly, the only way to end this fight is on the negotiating table. Because on the battlefront, it is impossible. Neither can the Ukrainians, even if the Americans were to enter the thing, it would be very difficult for them to get Russia to vacate the 20% of Ukraine that it still holds in the Donbass. And for the Russians, also, it is very difficult to make any headway. The progress that they've been making is enormous. It comes at a very, very heavy cost of blood and treasure and the soldiers. So they don't have the capacity to continue fighting like this. So it's a stalemate of sorts, if you look at it. And the only way forward now is to sit down and negotiate and find some way to immediately halt the fighting and then for the peace talks to get out. But I don't see fighting extending beyond the 26, Pranay. But I'm also aware of the fact that such predictions have been made in the past.
Yes.
And they've all been,
this is what President Donald Trump has also said, that, this war should not have gone beyond 3 weeks. But President Putin, failed to secure that victory. But anyway, a quick concluding comment, Sandeep. Even if this war comes to an end by some negotiation or by some intervention, but do you find the European territory at a more fragile situation after this conflict? Because now every country is in a position of a heightened military, security or military preparations. If you see the preparations of the Western Europe, their defense spending has gone up. So, are we looking at some big war coming?
Well, Pranay, good question. Europe is preparing for war. There's no two ways about it. Every country of Europe is on a heightened state of alert. They're spending more money on defense. They're looking for partners. They're looking for production facilities. They're ramping up spending on defense R&D, and of course restarting old factories that were shut down. We've lived in broadly two eras of history post the Second World War, 80 years back. Now, after the Second World War, you had 1945 to 1989, which was the Cold War. Then from 1989 to 2022, you had the post-Cold War. Now, what we're living in today in the world, and of course, particularly in Europe, is the post-Cold War Europe, 2022 onwards. And every day that this war continues, the fear and the paranoia are accelerated. There are all these alarms about Russia being an invasion of Western Europe, and no country in Europe is safe, and therefore we have to rearm ourselves, and we have to. There's been some very, very warmongering statements coming out, particularly from NATO, where there's talking of annihilating the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad, and such as you have. But the thing is that there is a certain dichotomy in this. On the one hand, they say that Russia is too weak, it can't fight, it cannot do anything. It is, it's a third-rate power and all of that. At the same time, they say, no, it's ready to invade us, and therefore we must prepare. So there's a dichotomy in the arguments as well. But the fact is that on the ground, Europe is in an extreme state of paranoia. They're preparing for war, and even if there is an end to the fighting in Ukraine, the prospects of lasting peace in Europe are very gloomy, Pranay.
Thank you very much, Sandeep, for this insight and putting things into context. And we will try and see that what actually transpires after the meeting of President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who are scheduled to meet tonight. Thank you very much, Sandeep.
Thank you, Pranay.